Help support this channel and get early access to videos, plus exclusive content and patrons-only live discussions by becoming a member at patreon.com/Bruce Poinsette. What's up, everyone? It's Bruce. And today we need to talk about media literacy because Willamette Week has had a couple of truly unfortunate headlines and that have caused unfortunate reactions in the city in the past couple of weeks. And it's easy to talk about. Just please read the full story. But obviously, we know people don't. We know people react. So we got to talk about how this works. Let's start with the most recent story, which was law enforcement officials suspect Multnomah County man released early from prison is a serial killer. So this went around, and should note, by Nigel Jaquise and Lucas Manfield. Fun fact, Lucas Manfield and I actually were in English class throughout high school. So there's interesting connections. But yeah, this headline went around, scared a lot of people because, they're posting about not just the idea that, a serial killer is on the loose, but also the article and, subsequent social media posts, especially on Instagram and Twitter, were linking the release of this man, because I guess it was part of Kate Brown trying to, or Kate Brown, but the governor, releasing people from prison to, stop jail overcrowding, stop, just the excesses of the prison industrial complex. And basically, what does that do? That makes people say, oh my goodness, these policies they're endangering the people. You're letting dangerous criminals run the streets. And a serial killer? Are you kidding? What are we doing? So fun fact of this article. And you can see it actually. Let's bring it back, because maybe you missed it on the first share screen. So if you look, and even the subhead, which you don't see especially in the social media post, although they will note this in the caption, Jesse Lee Calhoun is in custody. He's not been charged yet. He's in custody. He's clearly a suspect in this case. So actually, there's not a serial killer on the loose. They're actually investigating him for this, and he is in custody. But you've already done the damage by noting the program to release people from prison and suggesting that one of the results has been letting a serial killer on the loose. And, again, just sparking the idea of like Oregon has these crazy, radical liberal policies that are actually endangering people. And a lot of people, again, they only see the headline. I think the Instagram post was the one that got me the most, just because you see the headline, but then in the caption, as opposed to the subhead in the story, they note, and it's at the end of the caption too, that he is in custody. And it's just like, you're misleading people. You're absolutely misleading people. But that was this week, I believe, a week and a half. For that, we got a real doozy. No, let me share this one with you. Multnomah County will distribute tinfoil and straws to fentanyl smokers. It's similar to other, in air quotes, harm reduction efforts nationwide. Again, by my old classmate, Lucas Manfield. So, if you're not in Portland, You can probably guess how this was received. We're in the middle of a fentanyl epidemic. You know, homelessness is increasing every day. And a lot of people took this like, wait, we're we're in crisis and you're gonna help drug addicts do more drugs? What are you doing? This is crazy. This is not, again, the idea, the perception of Portland as this place of, these crazy liberal policies that are out of control and the city is burning down because of them. But again, if you read the story, they do quote actual, people who do work with people with addiction. This is not, people actually do harm reduction methods in other cities. This is just as a way to distribute. Yes, it is paraphernalia, but also so people can at least more safely do the drugs they were already going to do, to hopefully reduce, because again, it's harm reduction. It's not the ultimate solution, it's not the ultimate goal. But when you have people dying on the streets, the hope is to have less people dying on the streets. And it's just one measure. Yet, how did people respond? Poorly. You had, again, chaos, Portland. What is this? What are we doing? Why are we giving tinfoil and straws to fentanyl smokers? What kind of crazy plan is this? So, of course, that breaks out, on social media into arguments between people who have some concept of harm reduction and people who really didn't, really don't. And also, I'm me personally, I don't get into a lot of like Twitter stuff. I don't care. I really don't. But I'll watch the train wreck like a lot of people. So I saw a lot, a lot of discussions again where people are saying, "How dare you do this?" And like they're ignoring some of the like facts in the article to continue making their case. They're ignoring any concept of or studies, other applications of harm reduction, other cities that this is based on. And when pressed about, okay, so what should we do instead of this? Guess what the solution is? We need to better enforce the laws. We need more police to arrest these people on the streets. And like, that's not just, people who, like Mingus Maps and Renee Gonzalez supporters. It's not just, people for Portland. It's not just conservatives. It's a lot of people you would not otherwise think of who, when pressed, are like, no, bring in more police for this. Arrest these people. They're, I'm tired of seeing this on the streets. It's the very, it's it's a destructive way of thinking about it. Because even if your goal is saying, I don't like seeing this on the streets, we need to do something. If the place you arrive at is we need more police to brutalize the people, that's actually not going to solve the problem. Even if you actually believe that does not. We've proven it. We've seen it. It doesn't solve the problem. People complain about downtown Portland, and it's exaggerated, but there's a real homelessness issue. And yet, guess what hasn't made that better? Giving more money to the police. Diverting, because in order to give money to the police or get more money to the police budget, you got to divert money from other things. And it's usually stuff like the community services, is the other things that actually prevent poverty and suffering. But you're taking money from that so that, one, you're causing more harm and suffering. You're putting more people in a desperate position, and then just giving more money to the police to then deal with that. Again, it's very counterproductive. But after a weekend, at least with this story, it was saying, well, Noma County will distribute, meaning the policy had gone through. But guess what? After a weekend of internet arguing, where do you think we landed? Well, Noah County reverses plan to distribute foil to fentanyl smokers. Yep. And notice in the subhead, Willamette Week first reported the new harm reduction strategy last week. Notice how harm reduction is no longer in air quotes. Again, Lucas. But, the job was done by then. And it's unfortunate because actually more people are now going to die. More people are going to suffer. More people, like, even if you're like, hey, no, we need to put more resources into addiction support services, people to work with people, uh, things to get help for people. We didn't do that either. All we did was just like slash one harm reduction measure and, raise the volume on people who would like to use this as an opportunity to funnel more money to the police to, again, not solve the problem. And this is we use these two examples from Willamette Week, but this has kind of been a consistent part of the infrastructure for just depowering progressive policy and policymakers in Portland. I think it really echoes of when Joanne Hardesty, former city councilor who was defeated by Renee Gonzalez, was falsely charged with a hit and run, and Portland police officer Brian Hunsiger was kind of like led that effort. Let's pull that one up in case you didn't hear about that, in case you forgot. So back when she was on the city council, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty was falsely accused of hit and run that the Portland Police Union then blasted out. And of course, once you put the headline out there, you can't take it back, and the smear is done. Now, again, it was found to be false. She sued, but guess what? PPB reinstates officer who leaked report that falsely accused Hardesty of hit and run. February 2nd, 2023. So, even though someone did a very malicious act of manipulating the media system, it got its job done. It helped depower Joanne Hardesty just a little bit. She ended up losing her election. It's not all on this hit and run charge, but it's part of a larger, bigger effort to just kind of like hit her from all directions and attack the person who was basically the champion of progressive policy on the city council at the time, and get her out of there, which they did, replaced with a conservative. I guess he's a Democrat, but that only means with so much in Portland. So, and it's all just that's how this the politics, the lobbying organizations, specifically the Portland Business Alliance, I believe they've changed their names to like the Portland Metro Council, lobbying groups like People for Portland, say lobbying, more like propaganda groups who, put billboards around the city, again, that basically work as anti-tourism ads, basically suggesting, again, that the city is in chaos, is in flames because of these dangerous progressive policies and just going overboard in a way that actually isn't happening. But it all serves the purpose, again, of depowering progressive policy, depowering progressive policy makers. And it gets its money's worth as far as this interaction between policymakers, lobbying interests, and media. So as I mentioned before, with some of like the debates that spilled out on social media, it divides a lot of people who would otherwise be comrades, or that might be the generous way of putting it. It exposes the divisions between people who might otherwise be comrades and exploits them. One, in terms of the message it puts out to, you know, people in the suburbs, people outside of Oregon, again, it makes this perception that it is this like liberal bastion utopia that's gone too far, when in reality, we have a city council right now with 4 city councilors and the mayor. So it's, 5 people serving on the city council, 4, including the mayor, pretty decidedly conservative, and are passing a lot of policies to, again, defund community organizations, pump more money into the police, defunds, necessary services and resources for the most vulnerable people in the city. It's not particularly liberal or progressive at all, but you listen to, I listen to influencers, watch influencers from places like Atlanta, and they're talking about Portland, the same way. Like they're basically just repeating the same messages from these anti-tourism ads, these things demonizing progressives in the city. Because, what other message? That's the loudest bullhorn. That's the loudest, it's the loudest messaging they're hearing. They're not hearing, people on the ground. They're not hearing the actual progressive people in the city. They're just hearing this perception because they have the money to put it out there. Same way, again, like in the suburbs. I grew up, as I've talked about before, I grew up in Lake Oswego, Lake No Negro, Oregon. And it's funny how a lot of people from LO who participated in those same 2020 protests. And yet when you see these ads during the midterm elections showing, footage of the protests and, with the scary music and talking about how Portland's burning down and how these defund the police radicals are destroying the city, like the people in LO buy it, hook, line, and sinker, even though they know people who went into those protests. Some of them are their kids, but they see that image, they see the music, they want to believe these things, so they do. So it just it feeds this narrative so that, when someone wants to run, like Mingus Maps running for mayor, wants to, say he's going to try and like get the city in order. And, when especially Republicans, but a lot of basically Republican Democrats get out here and say things have gone too far, they use that perception and the weight that perception holds amongst people, especially outside of Portland, as kind of like another tool to legitimize themselves. Because again, sometimes perception can be stronger than reality, at least as far as the hold it has over people. And, we can only hope with these efforts that, they're not further successful and not successful in, propelling Mingus Maps to mayor of the city. Another thing they've been talking about is, even though that 60% of the city voted to pass charter reform, which would, would make it a ranked choice voting system, would expand the city council to 12 seats, not including the mayor. And it'd have people, basically 3 people from like 4 different parts of Portland would be able, would be serving on city council. The mayor would not have the vote he has now. But you have efforts again from Renee Gonzalez, another city councilor, Dan Ryan, who want to put in reforms that no one asked for actually to the charter right now. What are those reforms, you ask? One of them is shrinking that number of 12 city councilors back down to 8. And the simplest way to explain that is it's easier to control 8 people than it is 12. They also want to give the mayor veto power, which I'd say runs completely counter to a decision to expand the city council to 12 seats and get the mayor out of that vote entirely. clearly it's the opposite. It is clearly not what the voters asked for. But the same forces that behind, giving you these headlines, behind these stories, behind kind of like raising that panic, like it also works towards this goal. There's a protest today at city council, in favor of supporting the charter reforms that people voted on. And even then, the reports from that were just like, when one, they weren't even going to let, there's supposed to be a work session on the charter. It was supposed to be a public work session. And then initially they were, shout out to Alex Zelinsky on the reporting, but initially they weren't going to let people in with the protest there into this public work session. They had to reverse that. And then once you had the people, advocates from the city, they did what they do. And just, you had these condescending kind of city council questioning periods, which is kind of just, again, it's become the case when they were trying to defund, again, NEA, Latino Network, Urban League, forgetting one, my apologies. Or when they tried to, when they tried to take the money from an organization specifically around alternatives to policing. It's always been the same thing where they bring the people in a very public platform and just, they just demean you and gaslight you in front of everybody. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how obvious it is, because it's not for the people, it's for these interests. It's just to keep advancing these policies that the Portland Business Alliance, or Portland Metro Council is trying to advance. So what can we do about this? Because again, misleading headlines, how they, help certain political causes, specifically the powerful, that's not new. But we can't just, we're in a situation where media itself is like losing its infrastructure, it's losing its funding, its ability to be agile, to serve people increasingly every day. So how do we fight against these misinformation, disinformation campaigns, these frankly just bad faith headlines especially about progressive policy? One, I think we got to name the need over and over for media literacy. Like, it should not just be, these things affect policy. A weekend of effectively like Twitter debates ended a harm reduction policy that will very well result in more lives lost on the streets of Portland. So media literacy just cannot be something that you just get in, if you happen to have the privilege, the money to go to journalism school. So yes, I can tell, don't get me wrong, I'm going to beat that drum of read the actual story. Don't just read the headline, read the story. But we need more. When we understand that, guess what? People are pressed for time. People are just scrolling. They're getting a lot of their access to news from the social media accounts, and they're engaging with it that way. You can't just pretend that doesn't exist. You can't just tell people, well, read the actual story, do what I did in journalism school without anything else. It's proven that people don't care. So how do we respond? You need to, those of us who do have the information, those of us who do have some of this background, on an individual level, we can give advice. Again, number one, read the actual story. Also, very much encourage people, research things they're unfamiliar with. In this case, harm reduction. It could have been such a more productive discourse if people actually kind of understood anything about harm reduction and what it means, what are the implications, where it's been applied before. Or you could just, jump on your assumptions and say, given we're helping drug addicts do more drugs, what's going on? Like, I don't know about you, but when something seems kind of a little bit off, ask some questions, do some research. You know, if it feels like it's meant to like incite you, you should be cautious of being incited. But those are more individual suggestions that people with platforms can make to those who are listening. That said, most of us, again, we're getting this news, we're scrolling through our timelines, we're engaging in that little, what, 5-10 seconds, and then going about our day. So how do we combat that? Support local journalism infrastructure. We recently had an interview on this channel for the HB 2605, the Support Local Journalism Act. And just to remind you, I had Andrew Devigal and Jody Lawrence Turner to talk about that, and watch that on the channel. Subscribe, please. Again, support local journalism. But the funding, again, a lot of this comes to funding and like who's actually in these newsrooms, who's on staff versus, who's a maybe sometimes contributor, who's a guest contributor, who's a regular, but only a regular for 2 years, which may seem like a lot, but it's a lot different from 10. It's a lot different from being a staple, an institution, as a personality or as a source of news. So actually, like, these measures that support the funding so we can have more journalists in general, more perspectives in these newsrooms is important, because when you don't, you have a few people who are kind of like dominating the shaping of the narrative. And you also have sources. So, Willamette Week, Oregonian, despite ever increasing, and they're certainly not, they're not like, what's the word I'm looking for? They are also subject to this. They're also dealing with, newsroom cuts, struggles with funding, and like the transition to, how we consume media in 2023 versus the past. Like, Oregonian is dealing with that. Willamette Week is dealing with that because they are bigger, more established local outlets. They're able to weather that storm a lot differently than, smaller community papers, smaller independent outlets who, as opposed to weathering the storm, are just shutting down, or, they're shutting down their newsrooms so that all they get wire news, or basically like national news they pull from other sources, but they aren't able to do any actual reporting. So in that vacuum, what you get is the voices of a few reporters at the major outlets who have their own, conflicts of interest in terms of and also just traditions and how they've always operated. And that kind of shapes the discussion even more so than it already would in a more robust media landscape. So supporting these efforts to, again, provide more funding, bring more journalists into the room, train more people, also to that effort, in addition to supporting the newsroom, it's also important, again, support journalism education, especially, I think, in schools and at a community level. Like, kids I teach in schools, middle schools, high school, or I teach middle schoolers, high schoolers, and I'm always, you know, always surprised, sometimes scared about how much info on fact checking they've never received. They've never been taught like how to research things. It's like it's only I shouldn't say only, but it's these journalism classes, these courses where I'm a guest teacher for like 10 sessions out of a school year. Like this is where they're getting the most focused attention on this. And it just happens to be if I happen to be working with the right group or in other programs I work with, if I'm selected by the right teacher looking through a catalog of potential guest writers to come in, like if those circumstances align and the timing works out, then some of these kids might get just a little piece of this information that they need. But again, media literacy or lack thereof affects us all. It affects how we consume the media. It affects how we then make decisions based off our access to that information and how we consume it. So when we invest in the funding of journalism programs, journalism courses, journalism teaching, whether it's at the schools, but also community groups provide this as well. And it's an opportunity because again, media literacy is not, it's not exactly there for adults either, but it's necessary and it's worth, I know there's so many crises we're dealing with. And when people already don't really understand media, it's hard to understand why you should put more funding into media, but it is clearly affecting us all. And we need to support it. We need to build it, build that understanding, build that literacy, support a lot of jobs that people get. Like teaching this is a job. A reporter is a job. People are able to feed their families, pay their bills, support the economy through these jobs. Like there's a lot of clear reasons, obvious reasons why we should be supporting more media literacy in general and just a more robust, diverse, and agile media environment in general. And it all comes down to money. Are we willing to put our money into it? I can be on here and tell you again, support the Patreon. I am an independent media creator. And, but that's one thing. But whether you support me, whether you support someone else, support. And not just, again, there's the individual level, but on a larger systemic, on a policy level, we need to be putting real funding towards our, as people at UOPDX like to say, our info health, our build, the way we engage, not just with the information and what's happening around us, but how we do it effectively, how we do it more effectively, how we do it in a way that supports the betterment of our communities and the people around us. Because right now, clearly, it's being used in a way, the media, as it's always been, to be fair, but it's being used in a way it's kind of in bad faith. I want to say malicious all the time. A lot of the time it's malicious, but it's definitely harmful. And, at least especially from a progressive policy standpoint, like it is doing major damage all across the board. So we gotta do something better. We gotta, again, invest in our information health because lives are literally at stake.